Michael Boyle's StrengthCoach.com presents the Strength Coach Podcast, brought to you by Perform Better, the experts in functional training and rehabilitation. PerformBetter.com.
All right, hey everybody, welcome to episode 353 of the Strength Coach Podcast, brought to you by Perform Better, the experts in functional training and rehabilitation. Check them out at PerformBetter.com. I'm your host, Anthony Rana. The show notes are located at ContinueFit.com or StrengthCoachPodcast.com. All right, today on the StrengthCoach.com and MBSC.TV Coach's Corner with Coach Boyle, we spoke about information overload for young athletes and what we can do about it in the weight room. Knowing the lens that coaches are looking through, and that was kind of started from the lateral jump thread he had on Twitter that just went off the charts. Understanding the conditioning from the sport and how to fill that bucket. That was from a tweet by James Smith. Don't forget, we also did a special interview called 40 Mistakes, 40 Years. You can check it all out at StrengthCoachPodcast.com. You can get access to it there. For the Hit the Gym with the Strength Coach segment, brought to you by Athletic Greens. Athletic Greens wants to give you a free 1-year supply of immune-supporting vitamin D and 5 free travel packs with your first purchase. Go to athleticgreens.com/strengthcoach. Today I have on Casey Wheel. Casey is the head strength and conditioning coach at Pacific Ridge School in Carlsbad, California. He trains athletes from grades 6 to 12 for a variety of sports at his school. He's a longtime StrengthCoach.com member and contributor. He has a real passion for agility. So we're going to talk about agility through the Strength Coach lens, define agility, where he thinks coaches might be getting it wrong. We're going to talk about his 4 tiers of transfer system for agility drills. Great stuff with the 4 tiers and where to put things. Creating and limiting separation. I asked, is there a place for implement training? So like a lacrosse stick or the soccer ball. Also, where does weight training fit into all of this, and his thoughts on linear speed, vertical jump, and working with teenage athletes. Good stuff coming up from Casey in a little while. For the Nomly, maximizing the member experience with Sumi Seth, founder of Nomly. They help you build relationships through personalized communication so your members stay longer and pay longer. Go to Nomly.com, NAAMLY.com. You can schedule a demo. You can get a feel for what it's all about. Use the referral code StrengthCoach. You'll get a free 30-day trial. Today, Sumi continues his experience with customer service on his ski trip with his kids. So another kind of great story. Today, he talks about onboarding and really all the touch points leading up to your experience. I think he makes a great point in this segment about sometimes we don't realize how many touch points we have with the consumer, from really starting at the website to when they come in and get to their coach. So great segment from Sumi coming up. Perform Better right now, online sale, still 50% off a bunch of stuff. Big savings on bumper plates, kettlebells, dumbbells, so much stuff. Guys, there's also one thing you can remember. When you go on to shop and you'll see there's a sale, but there's also closeouts. Don't forget those too, because it's never really included in the sale, but it's stuff that are marked down pretty heavily. The one-day seminars continue in Boston, March 18th, and in Chicago on April 22nd. Also, the summit dates for Orlando, Chicago, Long Beach, and Providence are all set. I will be in Long Beach. I am excited for that. Check it all out at PerformBetter.com. Guys, lots of things to get to, so let's get on the phone with Coach Boyle. All right, now it's time for the StrengthCoach.com and MBSC.TV Coach's Corner with Coach Boyle. You can try the new StrengthCoach.com out for 7 days for free. Totally new format, user-friendly, same great forum as always. Go to StrengthCoach.com. Check out your free trial, 7 days. Coach, how you doing?
I am doing well. How are you?
All right, hanging in. Some good stuff going on. Twitter, Mike Boyle, Instagram, StrengthCoach.com. A lot of stuff today I could choose from, but everybody knows I only get 3 things to mention, and then bang zoom to the moon. Coach, great post from Skip Capone about Chip Kelly talking about how young athletes get overloaded with information. And so they cut their kind of practices. He was talking about when a new play comes in, hey, that's a great play. What are we taking out? Loved everything he was talking about. How does this apply to the weight room? Is it teaching less technical lifts? Is it progressing slower? Is it less change? I know you talked about with your summer athletes, a lot of times you were like, no, we only have 2 exposures a week. So we're going to keep those same lifts. So over time, they're going to get that exposure that they need, but we're not going to throw too much stuff in there. How does this apply to the weight room?
I think it applies just to the idea of not over coaching and even not making the workouts too long, not adding exercises without subtracting exercises. I think when I look at it, and I love Chip, I mean, I haven't seen Chip in 20 years, but I knew him back in the old UNH days. He was offensive coordinator up at University of New Hampshire. He used to come down when they bring players down. But it's like the idea of, okay, I want to add, we're going to start doing one leg squats. Okay, what are we going to take out of the workout? Because what you'd see, sometimes you'd look at people's workouts and you think, oh, they just kept adding stuff in. And all of a sudden, oh, yeah, we're doing lunges and we're doing one leg squats and we're doing rear foot elevated split squats and we're doing Nordics and you look and think that lower body day is now taking you 2 hours of just lifting. So we always look and think, okay, we have, let's just say, maybe we've got 8 slots a day. Maybe there's 8 exercises, of which 4 to 5 are going to be major strength exercises. And if you're adding one, you've got to take one out. And so that's why when we're showing people, even when we're talking about programming and program design, it's like, okay, look at this programming template and then tell me, okay, if I'm going to add in chin up, it's easy. Okay, well, I'll take X pull downs out. I'll take one of my lat pull down variations out because it's the same pattern and this is a better choice. But I think what's happened for us is that I think we're at, in most cases, the best choice for each pattern. So that limits the amount of variability that you're going to really have. So I think it's really identical concepts. It's keep your workout short. If you're going to take something out, put something, or if you're going to put something in, you got to take something out. You've got to look at the attention span of these athletes and realize that you can't be designing 2-hour lifting workouts for these people and then wondering why they're not doing it. So to me, it correlates almost perfectly.
Yeah, agreed. Coach, something we've been talking about forever. And I wish we could shout it from the mountaintops because I think it's really important when we're listening to, even with you, like I always said, like you can't always listen to Coach Boyle, like understand, because he said it before, it's the lens. You wrote, just a reminder, we have a lens through which we view training. Your lens can be colored or altered by your training, the sport you primarily work with, what you read or what you listen to. We train kids starting at 11, 50% are female, probably half play hockey. I would say another thing to add in there, your facility is unlike 95% of the facilities out there. We do not, you have completely different facility, different size, whatever. So I absolutely love that I wish you would do this more to remind people, look, this is where we're coming from. I think a lot. And this is why I personally love the podcast, is because it allows you to expand on so many things that you're kind of tweeting or that you don't have enough time with, in whether you're writing it even on the strengthcoach.com forum. Talk to us about where this went with, because somebody said, and right, the one guy that said, like, what does this mean? So talk to us about what this means for you when with this lens.
Well, it's like some people, so I think it kind of came out of the 2-foot lateral jumping plyo thing. And some people really got upset. And, and suddenly it was people like, well, what about mogul skiing? And what about, this guy in volleyball? And this guy, I'm like, okay, you have your way of looking at it. I have my way of looking at it. Again, for us, kind of volleyball and basketball aren't 2 of our major sports. So we don't see that as much. So I think what I was trying to get people to think about is don't just look at it from your perspective. I'm always trying to get people to think, look at this in the bigger picture. How, if you looked across the range of people that you're training, do you see a lot of people that are jumping and landing on 2 feet? And my feeling, laterally, like, yes, we see lots of vertically directed things where people go up off 2 feet, they come down off 2 feet. I don't think we see too many things where somebody goes to their right and lands on 2 feet and then jumps from 2 feet to another 2 feet landing on their left. I just don't think that happens very much. And that's basically what I said. And it's amazing to me because sometimes I say the simplest of things that produce, I had one, not acquaintance, I guess it's not really a friend, but was really mad at me. Mad, like angry direct messages. And I just was surprised. I'm often surprised how viscerally people will interpret disagreement. And I'm sorry, but I look at social media and think, if you're on social media, you need to understand that there's going to be disagreement. If you post something and say, hey, the sky is blue today, someone's immediately going to post, did you not notice the white clouds over there, Mike? You know what I mean? It's like, that's just what it is. And that's kind of part of why you do it. I don't think, maybe someone should start agreement.com, where, hey, I'm going to post stuff and you agree with me. I post something and you go, oh yeah, way to go, Mike. You're the best strength coach ever. I love you. It's like, no. And if anybody should be sensitive, it's me. I get probably more personal attacks than the average person anyway. Maybe not than everybody, but certainly more than most. And I just kind of take it in stride. Like, hey, that's part of social media. If you're going to post something, if I don't agree with it, I'm going to probably say, oh, I don't agree with that. And this is why, or I don't agree with this. And then a lot of times I'll post an article. I wrote an article about that. I try to post some supportive information with my opinion when I'm not in agreement. But yeah, it was just, I just wanted people to think, hey, we all have it. My problem is I said too many people have the football lens or they have the West Side barbell lens or whatever it is. And it's like, well, wait a second. You've got this really narrow view that you're looking through like this, where you say, oh, okay, I see everything through the lens of someone who trains football linemen, or I'm a power lifter. And it's like, okay, you've got a narrow lens. You need to broaden that lens and think, how does this apply in a bigger perspective?
What would you say? Isn't your lens narrow then? If you're just, a lot of 50% are female half play hockey?
I would think that we're broader, at least in the sense, we've got adults, we've got kids, we've got males, we've got females, we've got hockey players, we've got we've got lots of other athletes. So I would think, but also I think that I will very often approach things from my hockey lens, because that's that's what I try to get people the idea. That's the one I've used the most. That's the one I've looked through the most. So I tend to revert back to that, not intentionally. And that's what I want people to think about. I don't intentionally make a hockey specific application to this versus a basketball specific application, but it is probably the nature of what my reaction would be. My reaction would be, I'm going to view this in or through my most used lens. And that's why I think it's really odd that people get so mad. People got heated. I was surprised. The good thing was a lot of engagement, and people accuse me, oh, you get a lot of clicks doing that, and get a lot of likes. And I'm thinking, you
didn't sell anything.
Right. I didn't sell anything. And I don't post anything with the idea like, oh, this is going to get a huge amount of engagement. Never think about that. I just post, whatever I'm thinking. It was like the bodybuilding thing that we talked about. 750,000 views. Like, this will be my highest number of engagements on Twitter ever. Like, I might get 4 million this month because some of these posts got so many views. But sometimes I just sit down in the morning and think, like, I read something and think, oh, boom, I'll tweet a response to that, or I don't agree, or I think this might be a great teaching point. And some of them really get great engagement. Like yesterday, I posted something about kids strength training. Engagement really low. Instagram, 10,000 views or something like that. And I thought, wow, I think that maybe will be really interesting for people. Apparently I was wrong.
Well, I think people are missing out when you get so heated from the perspective of, I went through that thread and there was some great responses in terms of even the disagreement. Like, oh, coach, I disagree because I think it's a great, like Peter Twist chimed in there just about, hey, as a teaching progression, Scott Livingston, he obviously works with a lot of skiers. I mean, there were some great threads good that didn't maybe agree with you, but said, hey, this is how we're using it with progressions. I think you can learn a lot without just seeing the fire and saying, coach, you're wrong, you're this, you're that. That's, you got to use it. And, what about this sport? What about that sport? It's like, relax for a second, read what some of these people are saying. Some guy who was on your side as well was talking about center of gravity. There was some really good. He was defending it pretty well too.
It's great. Like Lauren Goldenberg, same way. Lauren was on there saying, "Oh, I like those kind of plyos. I use them." And then I went back, and that's why I filmed Courtney doing kind of. And what queued it up was I had seen somebody, and it was a football strength coach doing some lateral plyos, and it was literally 2 feet sideways, 2 feet, 2 feet, 2 feet, 2 feet. And I was just like, I don't really see the benefit of that. And so that led to the tweet, which I did with a video. Okay, here's what we're doing. But wow, it's crazy how some of these things blow up.
Well, I looked at it, and when I make my videos for power for men in their 50s to try to help them stop the rapid decline of power as they age, I'm not going to listen to what you're saying, right? I am. Obviously, I'm heavily influenced, but I'm trying to get 50-year-olds to move a little bit quicker. And if that means being safe, staying low to the ground, doing double leg jumps really quick right now as a progression, I'm all for it. I don't care about what sport that, their kids are playing. I'm caring about them producing power in their 50s. So I don't know why people get so mad. That's, I guess, what I'm trying to say.
Yeah, it's really it's very interesting, and it's it's good for me. I feel bad when people get angry. I feel bad when people get upset. I feel bad when people feel, as I said, one of the people that I spoke to, felt like I had personally attacked him and that I'm a bully on the internet. And I went back and read through all the responses trying to think, wow, did I ever look like I was, or feel like I was bullying somebody, or feel like I was being disrespectful? It just was more like, hey, go watch that video again and tell me that you don't think, because, and I've had this talk probably 10 times this week at the gym with different people on the staff. I understand when people show me, hey, here's this guy, in rugby, or here's this guy in basketball, or here's this guy in football with 2 feet on the ground. And I'm like, I get the 2 feet are on the ground. But if you look at what the actions are, the action to get somebody to move from right to left almost has to be more harder landing on the right and more push-up on the right. Like, it's very, very difficult. Some people are like, well, Saquon Barkley can jump cut off 2 feet. And I'm like, yeah, if you kind of look at it, I guess he sort of does. But I still think it's more, if he's going to his left, it's more right than left. It's just the way that movement has to be. But yeah, people were.
They don't have force plates under them, though. Like, that's another thing. Like, you're talking about something, we're not going to ever have force plates while Barkley's running, etc. But it just makes sense. Even with skiing, if you're going, if you're using your right side as the edge, the weight might be on one foot more as you push off. It's like a skater, like a slide board, right? I mean, you're going to eventually, both feet are going to touch each other, but then the right leg is pushing off.
Yeah.
Coach, James Smith wrote, on sport conditioning, regardless of the sport in question, the most relevant means of improving a player athlete's conditioning, quote unquote, is via the actions of the sport itself, because it is their sport actions and not any other that cause fatigue and competition. You retweeted this. There was some pretty good little on his side from his tweet, people kind of going back and forth a little bit. What does this mean to you? Is this more not a confirmation of less long slow distance or zone 2 type stuff, or what did you just feel like, we need to make sure we are preparing them for the sport at hand? What this mean to you?
I would say yes and yes. Confirmation, less long slow distance, yes, less zone 2 stuff. That And I think that it's a point that I've tried to make, and I guess it was, all right, I'm going to retweet somebody that agrees with me, which I will have a tendency to do, because I do believe that for a lot of field court sport athletes, team type situation, practice should make up a really significant portion of their conditioning. Yes, I think you can top off. I think you can polish it up a little bit with some additional work, but if they are practicing, that's going to be the majority of their conditioning. And conditioning, it's interesting because when we talk about kind of the pendulum swing, if we went back, I would guess that the Joel Jameson thing, the Ultimate MMA Conditioning book and all that, probably now it's probably been about 10 years. And I feel like now we've got another kind of shift back towards that. Oh, we need more cardiac output. We need more aerobic work. We need more aerobic base. And I'm like, no, we don't. If you've got athletes who are practicing, we don't need that. What we probably need is more kind of high end speed work and more kind of a more aggressive interval conditioning, because they're probably, and it goes back, I always post the same Dan Baker quote, which says almost the same thing that James Smith said, in terms of that basically most of the work that they're doing are at low to moderate intensities during practice. And that if we want to quote unquote fill the conditioning bucket, then we need to fill the high end. We're topping off. That's our job. Our job isn't to, if we got a 5-gallon bucket, our job isn't to put the first 4 gallons in. Our job is to put the last gallon in and to make sure that that last gallon doesn't overflow the top and is kind of in that Goldilocks just right kind of category.
So, Coach, would you say when you were at BU, you had them Monday through Thursday? They played games on Friday and Saturday. A couple times I was there. I know at the end you posted videos, airdyne intervals, end of the workout. So they're practicing every day. Would you say that you were trying to fill the bucket at that point, or was it more just like you felt like, hey, we're going to do some conditioning? So, because I'm just wondering, what were they doing in the BU practice? Were they not getting enough of that? Did you feel, is that why you had to do those?
Yeah, because I would feel like what we would do in practice is try to not overload them, because what we were always trying to avoid were the groin injuries. So I'd say, hey, if we want to do some additional conditioning at the end, let's do it on the bikes where we can get them off their feet, whatever, non-weight bearing conditioning, deloaded kind of conditioning.
You would tell the coach that, Coach Parker.
Yeah, we would tell the coach that, like, hey, because what I liked to do was build up, again, looking at practice as conditioning. Okay, let's build up the amount of practice that we're doing, but without throwing a lot of the old kind of Herb Brooks, over and back stuff in at the end, a lot of coaches would try to skate the guys into shape. And I would think, let's skate them into shape during practice. Let's get practices being really, get them moving, get them being really upbeat. And then if we want to do some extra conditioning, we'll come in and we'll do that on the bikes at the end of practice so that we're sparing their groins. That was always my idea, is that if I could get through that preseason period, maybe that 10 days or 15 days of us maybe not playing games and doing a lot of practicing, and I don't have a bunch of guys in the training room kind of hanging on by a thread with groin issues, then we're getting the job done the way that we want to. So I think and again, very hockey specific, but I would do the same thing with my basketball guys. Let's get them on the bike, get them on the slide board, get them, non-weight bearing. We don't want to do, like, whenever somebody would say, oh, let's condition them, let's run them, or let's condition them, let's skate them, I'd be like, no, let's not do that. Let's do something else, non-weight bearing, so that we can get that whatever cardiovascular, circulatory, energy system effect that we want without the high muscular cost, because it goes back to that kind of orthopedic cost idea, right? There's a cost to everything. If I'm going to do conditioning and I want to condition those guys on the ice and I'm going to skate them, there's a cost, and that cost might be X number of pulled groins. If I can say, hey, instead, we'd be very specific. We'd look and say, okay, forwards are going to do 45-second shifts, or, defensemen are going to do 1 minute, or not shifts, intervals. So basically for us, we'd be like, forwards are doing 0.3s, D are doing 0.4s. And I'd actually figured out where we said, okay, we maybe we're going to do 1.5, 1.6 miles today. So the D are going to do 4.4s and they'll be at 1.6. And the forwards are going to do 5.3s and they're going to be at 1.5. So we'll be within, 1/10 of a mile of each other, but we'll have done it in a more sport specific time frame for the position that they're going to play. And like we do the same thing like with the goalies a lot of times. I would just have the goalies doing 10-20s, 10 on 20 off, because I don't think the goalie needs to go for 45 seconds or for a minute, because their energy demand is going to again be different. So we would be making it specific to position. We'd be making it groin sparing in that way. So my whole thing with people is there's a lot of thought process to what we do that people don't even bother to try to understand, because they don't ask the kind of question that you just asked. Even with us, people would say, you do post-game conditioning. Yeah, we do post-game conditioning. But the only people who do it are the people who didn't play a lot.
Yeah.
The less you played, the more you do. The more you played, the less you do. Where our rule was that if you broke 20 minutes as a forward or you broke 25 minutes as a D, you did nothing.
Yeah.
If you were under 20 minutes as a forward, you made up the difference. So if you played 8 minutes, you owed me 12 minutes worth of intervals after the game was over.
Yeah.
Because I wanted to keep all those levels the same. I didn't want a guy. What we found is, hey, our fourth line guy or our third line guy could be getting out of shape as the season went on, because they're not killing penalties. They're not playing on the power play. They're not playing every other shift the way that, we might have some other guy who we could often have guys that played 8 minutes and guys that played 20 for forwards.
Yeah.
That would not be unusual.
Coach, you're obviously in favor of maybe a little less, skill work and a little more intra-squad scrimmaging to kind of replicate that gameplay,
Exactly. Small area games, that kind of stuff is going to be much better.
Yep. Cool. Good stuff, Coach. I'll leave you on that. Thanks for doing this.
All right, Ant. I appreciate it. It's always
a pleasure. We'll talk to you next time.
Welcome to Nomly's Maximizing the Member Experience segment. My name is Sumit Seth, and I'm the co-founder of Nomly. Last segment, I shared how I was prevented from boarding my flight and how that incident led to 2 different customer experiences, one horrendous and one amazing, all within 30 minutes of each other. The good news? I made it home on time so my boys and I could leave for our very first ski trip. I had bought one of the packages that included ski rentals as well as instructor lessons. But the website wasn't clear if we needed to purchase ski lift tickets as well. So guess what I did? I didn't buy it. We decided to come in a little early and ask the attendant at the check-in counter. She had no idea and flippantly sent us to the equipment rental counter to pick up our gear and ask the attendant there. And attendant number 2 didn't have a clue either. Anyways, we selected our gear, wore the ski boots, and were directed to the office where I hoped we'd at least stumble upon the answer. Speaking of stumbling, have you ever tried to jam a 12-year-old foot into a ski boot? At this point, covered in layers of clothing and sweating profusely, I realized I really needed to add cardio to my workout schedule. We finally geared up and did that awkward knees bent ski boot walk to the office to meet the manager and ask one more time about lift tickets. Hooray! Turns out we didn't read them. That is, unless I wanted to venture out on my own to the Black Diamond runs. Nah, I'll probably wait until I'm not out of breath after putting on the gear. It was time to hit the snow. Our instructor checked to make sure that the gear fit correctly. And as it turns out, my eldest boot did not. His bindings won't tighten. So the instructor had us all duck walk back in all that armored gear. I was running out of gas, enthusiasm, and we hadn't even started yet. I barely managed to keep the excited dad feeling as we got the new boot squared away and headed yet back to the snow. We were escorted back this time round to the training area by our assistant instructor, and we finally started the session. It was fantastic. He showed us the ropes, told us how to wear the skis, take them off, use one leg to ski, the pizza technique, and even ways to bend and sidestep. He gave plenty of attention to each one of us and lent a helping hand to some that needed it more than others. One of the 3 of us needed more help. I'm not going to say who, It was time to board the beginner ski lift and put our newfound skills and knowledge to use. What a wonderful, wonderful experience. We all fell in the snow, God knows how many times, rolled, made snow angels, tried to get back up, and crashed in laughter more than once. My kids took to skiing like fish take to water. As for me, I got really good at falling and propping myself back on. Hey, it's an art. We all had so much fun that it was beyond crazy. I share the story because in hindsight, it made me realize that our ski trip was really an onboarding process. In so many ways, that session is what most training gyms provide to their members, a semi-private session. However, it's not just that session that counts. It's everything that leads to the session and everything after that session. Those touch points are the ones that significantly enhance or diminish the overall experience. In my case, it was the website. It left me searching for more information. The attendants, they had no idea to my question and didn't even try to find the answer. The gear held. We got bad equipment. The communication and handoff between staff, there just wasn't any. The flow, crisscross and back and forth just to get to the instructor, the office, and be sent back to the snow. It was exhausting. Mind you, this was for a professional resort charging big bucks that gets tons of visitors every single day during the winter season that has probably been in business for longer than I've been alive. And yet they didn't have their stuff together. So today, when you get a moment, take the time to think about all the interactions your clients have with your own business and jot them down. The people they interact with, well, write down their names too. The questions they have asked or likely to ask, and you got it, write those down too. Then bring your staff together. Have your staff understand what other team members do. After all, success is a team sport, and it's your responsibility to get them on the same page. Create an environment for them to openly discuss and bring issues and solutions to bettering the current process. Make a habit of reevaluating your onboarding process at least once a year, and you'll see how sharp you and your staff are capable of being and elevating your overall member experience. Till next time, this is Sumit Seth, co-founder of Namely. For more info, please check out namely.com. You can schedule a free demo to discover how we can help bring your team on the same page, boost your overall member experience, and drive more repeat visits to create a profitable business. Use the referral code StrengthCoach to get started on a true free 30 days trial.
All right, now it's time for the Hit the Gym with the Strength Coach segment, brought to you by Athletic Greens. 75 high-quality vitamins, minerals, whole food source superfoods, probiotics, and adaptogens. I use it every day. For me, it fills in my gaps in my nutrition. I've actually been using it as like a pre-workout too. So interestingly enough, I kind of feel like it gives me a little energy. I don't know if it's in my head or not, but Athletic Greens is going to give you a free 1-year supply of immune supporting vitamin D and 5 free travel packs with your first purchase. Go to athleticgreens.com/strengthcoach for that offer. All right, today I have on Casey Wheel. Casey is the head strength and conditioning coach at Pacific Ridge School in Carlsbad, California. That's just north of San Diego, where the Titleist stuff is. That's a great location for golfers. He trains athletes from grades 6 to 12 for a variety of sports at the school, and he's found a love for agility, vertical jump, and speed. If you follow him on Twitter, which I highly recommend, you already know that. Now, his training focuses on training athletes to be a playmaker versus a workout warrior. We're going to talk all about that. Casey had to move to San Diego because he grew up in Stowe, Vermont, which was that really cold East Coast. That's a really, man, what a difference. From Carlsbad, he lives there with his wife and his 2 kids, 5 and 2. And I know we're going to get into that as well, kind of watching them move, for Casey thinking he knew it all about movement and kids, and now he's got his own kids. So, Casey, thanks for doing this, bud.
I appreciate it, Anthony. I've listened for a long time now. I think went to my first Perform Better in maybe 2009, and I saw you up there, and I think you maybe were 50 episodes in. I remember trying to catch up with every single one when I was, driving 40 minutes each way when, I was living in San Diego and driving different places. So I've listened to the podcast a long, long time. This is pretty cool.
Yeah. Also, I didn't mention Casey was really in the early days of strengthcoach.com. You were also a big part of that and a big contributor, and one of the people that probably got a ton out of that and helped a lot of other people as well. So very cool to have you on after all this time. So we're going to talk agility and training kids today. But before we kind of get into that, it's funny. I think I told you, I did tell you, I noticed kind of post asking you, not, because I saw one of your tweets and I thought, I got to get Casey on last month. I was thinking about it. And then I didn't notice, but you had posted a kind of, hey guys, look, I'm looking to get on some basketball podcasts to talk about agility with a strength coach lens. And I love this idea because, we have to, those two worlds do blend. And there is a piece that Coach Boyle talks about filling buckets. And sometimes we want to fill those buckets that are, the sport coach isn't filling for whatever reason, if we don't have good communication with them, whatever. But let's start to define what that means to you, agility, and what that encompasses, because I want to make sure we're all on the same page.
Yeah. So, agility is obviously very broad, and it's the gray area. It's like the fascia that connects sport and weight room, right? That's what I think of it as, is that connecting the dots between the two and really blending them together. And obviously there's a little bit of carryover each way, and we'll kind of discuss that. But in terms of definition, I know, in terms of there's a great research-based definition by Shepard and Young, who've really championed the change of direction, speed versus agility, research and data. And they have a rapid whole body movement with change of velocity or direction in response to a stimulus, right? So in terms of scientific, that kind of nails it, right? If you think of the ability to, change your speed, change your direction in response to a stimulus, which is the big catch-all, right? That's what changes it from change of direction, speed, or, just cutting, to agility. And you're reacting to something, whether, an invasion sport like basketball, lacrosse, hockey, where, it's mutual space and people can invade into any area, or, there's a barrier sport like tennis or volleyball where you're reacting to the ball and the positioning and, their arm, depending on, there's a million factors there, right? So all of it comes down to changing direction or speed in response to that stimulus. And then from there, I work with primarily invasion sports. I definitely work with volleyball and a little bit of tennis as well. But I was thinking about, what's the actual practical application of that for team sports or for invasion sports, the ones that, the majority of kids play. And I thought about, if I wanted to be a playmaker, because to me, playmaking is the thing that kids come to sport for. That's, in a terrible analogy, that's the drug that gets them hooked, right? When you make a play, that's the dopamine hit. That's what you feel good about when you made a play, right? Whether if your team lost by 10, if you're like, I made some good plays though, like that's kind of the emotional connection that catches you. And so, I was thinking, like, how do you make plays then? How does agility apply to those playmaking abilities, or that feeling? And I came up with the ability to create or limit separation in order to make or disrupt a play, right? So that's, to me, the practical application for a lot of team sports like basketball, lacrosse, soccer, even football, certain positions, is that ability, whether you're on offense, you want to create and manipulate that separation to make a play, and on defense, you're trying to limit that separation to disrupt the play. If those two things happen, I think people are happy. And so that's where my definitions come into play, is that kind of science-based, research-based one, and then also the practical application one that I've kind of come up with.
Yeah, I love your ideas on playmaking, and I've been watching some of your videos on that, and it just looks so much fun as well. But let's talk about maybe where kind of, don't only want to blame it on the sport coaches, but where have coaches in general gone wrong with this? I know there's not a lot of people that are still saying, the speed ladder or the agility ladder, right? And we're just using it. There's a place for everything. So I want to, first of all, let's talk about where maybe coaches kind of get this wrong.
I think it's obviously dependent on sport and, the particular coach, but let's just get into kind of some general overarching areas that I've seen. So oftentimes in sport practice, I've seen a lot of, let's say in basketball, it's a lot of 5v0 running plays work, or, they'll do the weave or something like these drills that have just been in basketball forever, or in soccer. I'm sure there's other things, right? Where I actually say soccer is a little bit better when they play a lot more small-sided games, things like that, where, but then you look at some, skills trainers where a soccer player is going against a cone and, 5 hurdles instead of an actual defender, and there's 7 people in line. So things like that. So when you're creating separation, you need a defender. You need at least a 1v1 situation. And so, practice can deliver that. It absolutely can. I don't see a ton of it. I see more team-based stuff where they're going over plays, things like that, where it might not actually take place. And then on top of that is layering in some concepts around creating separation and what to look for so that players can simplify it, make it easier. So that's what I've kind of discovered through some game-based learning and some game-based play of agility games, to be able to communicate when they can take advantage and use that, and they can just transfer that to whatever sport. If they're using a basketball or cross stick or soccer ball, whatever it is, how can they utilize those movement skills and then they're implement and take over?
I love it, because actually on this episode with Coach Boyle, what we were talking about is a James Smith quote about conditioning. And just really, Coach Boyle and I were talking about this idea of how he prefers really some of those more scrimmaging, more of those 3v3 small-sided game stuff, because that's going to get the conditioning as well. So besides the agility, right, that you're talking about, there's other really great benefits that happen when we start to do these things. So do you feel like also some of these drills are coaches stay too long with I want to call them block drills, block versus random? You're talking about playmaking a lot, but so lack of a better word, like these kind of what was the word I can use for, they were talking about before, planned, I'm sorry, planned drills. Like, where are we spending too much time with those? Where do they have a place in agility training, the planned stuff?
Sure. So, I developed a simple 4-tier way to place agility drills in, right? So, it's actually my top tier. I call it tier 1. My top tier is some sort of competitive game against another human, right? Whether that could be the sport, that could be a 1v1 tag where there's a winner and loser. It's a competition, right? So that to me is the ultimate agility, revolves around that being the most transfer. And obviously for your sport, if you add the implement of a basketball, a cross stick, that's going to get more specific. But in terms of movement patterns and the ability for your eyes to read it. And so this goes back to that research of Shepard and Young, is they had this one study where they essentially had a person start at one set of cones. They ran forward about 5 meters, and then they could go right or left. And at the beginning, it was pre-planned. So they went right, left. And they had 2 groups. They had, I think it was AFL in Australia. It was, Aussie rules football. And they had like their top tier guys and then like the tier below them. And so the first time they went through it was all pre-planned, and they had about the same times. There wasn't much difference in speed. And then they added a coach. And so what happened was they timed them. Once they started moving, the coach would go left or right as they started, and they'd have to identify and go left or right, whether it was I forget if it was opposite or the same side. And they found that was the big separator, right? So that's where it separated the movement. So it was, and you see that in, how does a 36-year-old, or even, I think LeBron's a little bit of an outlier, but how does like an older player who's obviously well past their peak, and these younger guys are much more athletic, how do they stay in the league? Is because they start to read patterns more efficiently. They understand where to be. All of these things that we say as like, sport IQ, or, whatever it is, they're in knowledge of the sport. It's their ability to read patterns and adjust and anticipate movement. And so that's essentially agility in some way, right? In terms of how you want to create separation, is utilizing, have they shifted their weight? Have they, are they too tall? Can I freeze them and then go by them? Can I use a look? Can I use, you get into like free play with ball fakes and passes and things like that to utilize it as well. And so that to me, when you get that top tier, we'll go back to the tiers now, is like the top tier is playing in a situation where I can use that as much as I can. And then the second tier is still seeing human movement. So let's say it's a coach or just somebody else, and they're reacting. If I go left or right, they go opposite. So kind of like that drill I just set up with the research. So if somebody approaches me, if I move to my right, you go left. So they're still looking at human movement, but it's not competitive. So that'd be my tier 2. Tier 3 would be an audio, visual, or tactile cue, whether it's you have the light system, somebody points, whatever cue you want to use, where it's still reactive, right? That's still a reactive agility drill, but it doesn't have much transfer to my brain processing movement and wear positioning and all these different factors that apply to sport. And then the last one would be that pre-planned change of direction. So that's my tier 4. Now, this still to me has value, right? So if I've had a group that's taken 2 months off and then they're getting back into preseason training, I'm not going to throw them in a highly competitive situation day one, right? So maybe I do some pre-planned stuff and mix in some tier 3 with some audio visual cues and make it a little more reactive to just get their tissues, get their joints, get their muscles getting used to that speed and that explosiveness. So, excuse me. That's how I see that. And then there's also return to play stuff. So, you can look at if somebody's coming back, that's another great time to utilize that pre-planned change of direction drills to be able to have them, get back into maybe you can do different sides. You can give them more to the right than their left if you need to at first, or just ways for them to control that speed a little bit more and build up intensity. Because once you turn on the competitive brain, all the pre-planned stuff kind of goes out the window and they're trying to win, right? So you can tell them, to be careful, but if somebody's coming back from an injury, getting into a competitive situation can be a little risky at first. So you could have to kind of, layer into that.
Yeah, from a learning perspective too, I always remember Greg Rose talking about this idea. People were always wondering about drills, even on the golf course, and there's that block. Either using it like block learning, where just repeating it over and over and over again, and then there's some random stuff where there might be, even if it's in your brain, like if you're on the range and you're saying, okay. Jack Nicklaus always said this was the best way to come off the range or play on the range. Is like when you go to the range, take your driver out and imagine that first hole. Play the first hole. So you hit your driver first, and let's say you have 180 yards and you take out your 7-iron, and then you take out a chip and a pitching wedge, right? Whatever it may be. So you're actually playing that hole, right? So that could be random. Right? Because it's always, now you're playing different holes. So there's a place for both of them. And I think learning wise, the block stuff is really, really great in the beginning, just to kind of get those reps in, right? Would you agree?
So yeah, at the beginning when they're so new to it, the tricky part is depending on groups, like if they've done a lot of free play as a kid and played games and played sports, they have that base for agility. And then it just kind of depends on your group dynamics. Like if you get, a mix of kids who've never played a certain sport or have only played martial arts or golf, and then they're coming into more agility based game, that's a whole different environment that they've ever been a part of. So for that kid, they probably need a little bit more, block breakdown of change of direction and where to get their hips and how to sink down low. And for a more advanced kid who's been playing pickup sports in his street the whole time, his whole childhood, that's going to be already he's already fluid and ready to go. So that's where you have to kind of mix those two areas in and try to figure out the best case. Oftentimes I just lean more towards game-based learning than pre-planned, especially with high school kids. I'm going to go there. But if I had some, pro athlete who is coming off of an off season and just took a couple months off to relax, I'm not going to throw him in some competitive situation right away. I'm going to build him up, right, and talk him through the process. But and also he's probably doing some stuff outside of there with his skills trainer or whatever as well. So it may depend, and that's where you have conversations. But in overall, I'm trying to use as much of that tier 1 that agility based games as I can, because I'm also going to see then where they lack, whether it's where do they struggle? Do they struggle with their feet, their hips, their shoulders, their ankle, wherever it might be? And then from there, we're going to address it, whether it's in the weight room or I have some drills the next time we're there, we're going to work on and see like kind of what the overall areas that needs to be improved for whether it's the group or the athlete.
Yeah, I like that idea of almost as an assessment first, and then looking and saying, what tier should I put them in? Do we need to go back to 1 or 4, 4, 3, or 2? Right. So, but I love what you said. It reminded me. You talked about anticipating movement, when you brought up LeBron James, for example, and it reminded me of that sports science show that ESPN did for a while. And they had Ronaldo on, and he was heading the ball from a corner kick. And what they were doing is first they would kick the ball and he would head it into the goal, lights on. Then they would kick the ball, and right before it got to him, they would turn the lights off. You saw that?
I remember this.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
And then eventually, right, like they shut the lights off before the guy kicked it at one point. They just saw. So what they said is he was reacting to body position. He could never explain that, but he actually headed the ball because based on body movement and the position of that corner kick. It reminds me exactly what you're just talking about.
Yeah, you can't coach feel. There's no way around it. You cannot coach feel. And when we talk about some gifted athlete, they have feel, right? So you need to give them an environment to gain feel. And so in my head, where me and I think Coach Boyle have disagreed in the past, where he doesn't like to use as many agility games as I do, and I use a lot of them, is that I want at least to expose them to agility movements. So I use often a one-on-one game called GoalLine that I stole from Walton Norton Jr. in Boston. Obviously, there's a lot of very well-known coach. And so it's, we call it GoalLine. I'm sure he created it too, because it's just like crossing a goal line in football, but it's a 1v1 tag game, and the defender can't come off the line. They can't move forward, backward. They can only move laterally. And so you can do different stipulations, right? Different constraints around the distance between the two cones, the time to get through it. The defender has to use one hand or two-hand touch. There's a bunch of different constraints. We do face-off style where the defender starts in between the two cones, and so does the offense, maybe 4 yards away. And so it's to coach feel, the athlete needs to understand how to essentially create overcommitment or undercommitment with the defender, right? So if the defender can stay neutral or just even with them the whole time, that is a defensive advantage. They're going to win. If the offensive player can some way with their body language, with their speed, with their movement, with their shoulders, with their eyes, anything they want, convince the defender they're going to the right, but they're actually going to go left, or they're going to actually go left but continue right, that's the game you play with agility, right? It is simply messing with the defender, having this conversation with them. It's a story that's happening that you're able to create that separation, right? And sometimes you win, sometimes you lose. And so we utilize this game a ton because you need the feel. And what I've noticed with athletes, starting with ninth graders, even middle schoolers in my summers, is that the first couple weeks, it's really, really messy. They don't get it, right? And so what I've done, I actually called Walter one day and he walked me through a little bit of progression, is you start them on one side. You don't start them in the middle like that face-off style. That's what I was doing with my hockey guys. And they literally couldn't figure out the game offensively. They couldn't create separation anyway. So we started them on one side. And so the clock starts, let's say I give them 4 seconds to cross that line. The clock starts when the offensive player moves. So they get a little bit of head start with the reactiveness. And then they also are starting from one side. So the defender kind of has to catch up, right? So it's much more intuitive to be like, I'm either going to race you or I'm going to cut it back, right? And so it's really fun to watch how the kids get really creative about changing direction, about what moves they can do to create that separation. And so that game gave them feel, right? That gives them feel of how to utilize movement skill to create separation instead of just cutting to a cone and back or working on a crossover step, which honestly doesn't have much use in offensive agility. It's more defensive agility.
And I saw the videos you posted on Twitter. I'm gonna have some links for that on the show notes, because it's kind of cool to see the different levels of those 3 different things where you do first on the side, then the face off, and then the defender has, and they're kind of cycling through being an offensive player and a defensive player too, right?
Yep. Yeah. They switch lines every time. I try to make the matchups as even as I can, right? It's not fun to go, when I had some kid who's going off to play college basketball versus 7th grader, like that's not very fun. You try to make it as even as you can, but then all of a sudden, sometimes you get some younger kid who wants to go against an older athlete, and then it gets really fun, right? That's when you love it, but you try to make it as even as you can. I try to keep lines no more than 5, so there's not so long of a wait. If so, we try to make multiple games going on. So you get some visual reps watching people, but then also you're getting high quality reps in terms of speed and intensity. I don't want them to do this game very tired. I want it to be full speed and a lot of fun.
Yeah. Case, do you feel like, is there a lot of times, so for example, if I'm not that proficient in something,
Sure.
what are you doing to kind of like take a step back? Are there other drills that you're saying, okay, man, these guys just aren't getting it? Or is this one of those things like where Coach Boyle right now is on the kick of right timing speed? That's all we need. We need to time speed. And he feels like that's going to be his best way to get them really fast. What are you doing? It's just like, hey, more of the same, more of this. Let's take it down a notch, get a different partner, maybe who we know you can beat, build some confidence, and then start working from there. How do you teach this?
Yeah, it's so one, like I said, when I called Walter, I screwed this up from day one. I went to like a progression that was too hard. And I had these were good athletes. Like this was our varsity hockey team. And everybody thinks you had a varsity hockey team in San Diego, but they're pretty good and they're good athletes, right? Some of them play, club hockey in college. They were good athletes. These guys weren't scrubs. And when I put them face-off style, that was essentially, you think of like at the top of the key of a basketball court, right? And they have to create space. That is not very common in hockey. They're already moving, right? So to be standstill, essentially what I call neutral position of the defender right in front of them, about 3 yards away, that they couldn't really figure out how to shift their weight. And so what I figured out is there's two big things. They need to feel how to squat their hips and shift their weight. That's the two skills that you have to figure out. And then depending on the sport, you may need it with more run up or less space. So there's different constraints you can mess with. And so in warm up, sometimes I'll mess around with some of those concepts of how to feed into that. What I've noticed is when you start on one side, that gives them, they essentially sprint out first, right? So the easiest way to read it is with more time and more movement of the defender. So as that defender moves and they see, oh, they're behind me, I can beat them in a race. Or, oh, they're with me, I need to change direction. Their brain just starts to naturally process it.
Yeah.
Especially when their intent is high and they're having fun. So I don't coach it that much. What I'll coach is the concept of overcommitment, undercommitment, neutral, and ask them questions a lot of like, what did you see? Like, oh, he was overcommitted, so I cut it back. So when you break it down to really that simple, and then you think of sport, that's all sport is in terms of making plays. Like, oh, they were overcommitted here, so we swung it around, whether it's a pass or a shot, right? And this is just movement based with one-on-one. Hey, that guy was overcommitted. He went too far and I can change direction on him. They're shifting their weight there. And you get that very simple concept and tell them to apply it. And then you can have them apply that in any situation, right? Oh, were they overcommitted? Were they undercommitted? Did they have you in neutral? Like, get rid of the ball then, get moving, right? So it's a really easy concept. And in terms of like moves, what I'll say to them, I equate it to a baseball analogy of when you're on offense. To create that overcommitment or undercommitment, you have your fastball, which is your speed or your power. Like, I'm just going, right? I'm just going to go for it full speed. And that's where you train your 10-yard fly and measure that speed. The faster that is, the better that's going to be. Then you have your curveball, change of direction. That's essentially, I'm going to, cut back the other way. And then you have your changeup where it's off speed, where I might hesitate for a second and then go, to just change up those speeds and change up the pace so that the defender's always guessing they don't know. Because if a pitcher throws 100, that's great. But at one point, the hitters are going to catch up.
Love it. Yeah. Let me ask you though, because I didn't hear if you ever get to kind of implement training. So for example, with a lacrosse player or a soccer player, the ball or the stick or the tennis racket, where does that fall in, if it does with you?
So I have essentially, my main work is I have 3 sport performance classes as a part of my school, and then I have off-season groups that can be teams in season or off-season groups that are junior seniors. And that's the best time they can train. So typically, no, we don't use a ball. I have like a basketball group in the fall that does preseason training. We may do a little bit of stuff with the ball, especially because that's my background athletically. I don't have athletic background in lacrosse, so I have no idea what I'm talking about in terms of been watching video. Same with soccer. Like, I don't know step overs very well. Like, I can just show you what I see in terms of movement skills and how that interacts, and looking for that, how do I create overcommitment, undercommitment? But they love that goal line drill. They see the application pretty quickly. And then I work with coaches sometimes on how to utilize something like that with their sport. Lacrosse, it's a little trickier. You can do a lot more physical contact, right? So, whether they whether they have to get pushed out of that zone or you narrow it, something like that. You could create a dodging drill pretty easily with constraints like cones and have them go. But overall, it's just a great movement skill drill. How can I create separation with my movement skills is just going to be helpful. Whether, if you're playing lacrosse and you're off ball, how can I create that space without having the ball in my hands? And then if you have the ball in your hands, I'm sure there's plenty of carryover, right? So, for the most part, this movement skill translates to every single sport.
Yeah. And we can't do everything. I mean, like you said, you got to, and it's, again, interesting enough with Coach Boyle and that conditioning coach quote from James Smith we were talking about, really understanding and working with the coaches to say, Mike was talking about earlier today with conditioning, for example, like don't sprint the guys at the end. If you want to do conditioning, let's get that. Like, let's not kill them. We're worried about their groins, and this is hockey, right? Like, let's not do that. You do that thing. We'll get them over here. Let's let it be scrimmaging, etc. Like those type, the 3v3, whatever. Instead of doing some of the stupid things that we've done. So working with the coach obviously is it's kind of a no-brainer, but it's not. It doesn't happen at all, really. I mean, it's very that you hear more the opposite. So where does weight training fit into this in terms of, can you look at it and say, man, this kid needs to work. We need to get these people stronger, or because again, we look at the speed stuff, and Coach Boyle is talking about not even talking about the weight room for speed. So where do you put this with agility?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know if there's an exact answer for the total transfer. I generally think training capacities in the weight room is helpful, right? Very helpful. I'm a strength coach by nature. I like lifting weights. All of my kids still lift in a lot of ways, right? Do I think this has a direct transfer to them being more explosive in agility? Probably not. I don't think it has a crazy like it may be. And maybe it's health, maybe it's the ability to, handle that stress of agility. I don't think getting your split squat up is going to make you a better person in terms of cutting, changing direction. I think that's a lot of movement skill and a lot of practice. That's why I think we need to do it, especially offensively. Then you need to do it with the defender there. And has the defender seen you throw that move 10 times, right? So when you layer in the specificity, it's really general training, but I think general training is great. Like, I think that can really helpful. And if you're 5 pounds heavier and explosive, and you can then do those movement skills, that's an advantage to me, right? So hypertrophy is involved in there, general force production, general, eccentric absorption of the force. All of those things I think are at play. I'm not trying to mimic an agility move in the weight room. I do things like lateral lunges a lot, and whether it's, landmine style or with kettlebells or dumbbells or whatever it is, we use a lot of lunge variations with that because I want them to train those adductors in their groin, things like that. But I don't think it's going to carry over because the force is so much higher, similar to sprinting. You're not really, I know there's Matt Rea, I think he's with the Saints now. He had some paper on after you get over 1.7, times your body weight with squat, there's really no carryover to speed anymore. And it's not even that much before that anyway. I think it was like 24%. I forget the whole paper, but I don't think the transfer is as high as people think, but I don't think that means lifting now shouldn't be applied, right?
Yeah. What about this idea about deceleration, right? The best accelerators are, the best decelerators. So is there anything from that perspective? We're just trying to say, let's keep them strong. Let's keep these playmaking drills going, and that's going to take care of it.
Yeah, I think I attack it from all ends. We continue to do the agility games. We'll do some general deceleration and warm-ups, whether it's, lunge variations where we stop, or just like a pre-planned change of direction, right? Where once I say you're sprinting to me, cutting, changing back, just to kind of warm that up. I still utilize that. And then sometimes I'll, in the warm up, I'll stand maybe 15 yards away and I have them come at me and I say, when I move, I want you to change direction. So now they're then level 2 or tier 2 with me in terms of my tier thing of they're moving when I move, but it's not competitive, right? I want them to visually look at my body when I change direction. Now you change direction. So they're getting a reactive response and their brain is, processing human movement versus just, a clap or a hand in the air when I say turn. So, utilize a lot of those things in terms of training deceleration. I'm sure there's some research around that with eccentric loading, eccentric overload. We utilize some things like the reverse Nordics for quads, things like that. Or if you're doing like a heavier lateral lunge, again, I think it's going to help. I'm not sure that creates the explosiveness that we'd want. I think ultimately you need to do the drill, and we'll utilize some med ball drills with leaping and bounding. I utilize what's called the lateral speed bound, which is essentially, everybody thinks of skater squats, which are more vertical force, looking at the ability to create, like, they're creating horizontal distance with vertical distance. They're trying to get as far as they can.
Yeah.
When you look at change of direction in the game, it's more how fast can you get into it. And so I've switched my bounds ultimately away from these big skater jumps to they catch a little bit of flight time, but they go as fast as they can and they bounce back. And we'll use med balls. We use some bands with that. And we'll add we'll add sprints, cutting back the opposite direction out of there a little bit for maybe 2 or 3 steps. So I've used that for overloading that ability a lot, those lateral speed bounds, which is a version of, plyometric that I've utilized in my strength sets, right? So if we do some sort of lunge, I might throw that in as the A2 or B2 right after it, following a general strength exercise.
Yeah, I love that, because I think we don't hear enough of. You're right. It's all this get as far as you can, as high as you can, all the time.
Yeah,
it's funny because working with older folks like I do, like people in their 50s, what I've been trying to teach them is staying lower to the ground from a safety perspective, not even from what you're talking about. It's like, we still want it really quick, but for me, it was more about safety and not getting that right if they can't handle those loads. So make it shorter, but keep it quick. So it's interesting that you talk about, to kind of change that, because you're right. It doesn't happen really. It doesn't happen in sports like that.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, go ahead.
Where are you at speed right now? Like linear speed. Sorry, I should say linear speed. Where are you with, teaching linear speed? I know, your love is in agility and some of this, but where are you with linear speed right now?
I take a lot of cues from Tony Holler and Coach Boyle and other people with timing sprints. I think I keep it very simple. And I keep it very simple in terms of that. And when I think of creating separation, if you're not explosive out of those steps, it's hard. Ultimately, you want your fastball to be as fast as possible, so then you can use your off speed and your curveball, right? So I want that fastball going, right? And so we utilize the 10-yard flies a lot. We train that at least once a week, if not twice, and we utilize these games as kind of the other days. As one, it's kind of more free play based. It's a little bit more fun, a little bit different stimulus. And it also uses a lot of accelerations, right? When you're doing short bursts, it's much more acceleration based. So we utilize both constantly.
Yep.
And I think they connect to each other, right? It's how much acceleration speed can I get? And then agility is also, interacting with the defender, and how can I use that speed to create space?
Yeah.
Ultimately, those two things just are one and the same.
Yep. Just FYI, the dog came in about 10 minutes ago, and here at the Strength Coach Podcast, we love dogs. So you're good.
Oh, hell yeah. My dog.
She came in like 10 minutes ago.
That's great.
So what about one thing I just reminded me of? If you're working with somebody, a lot of times we have some linear speed, and then we have to do some of the agility work. So doing that agility work, are you ever doing some agility work kind of at that kind of, not, I don't want to say top end vertical, top end, linear speed, but where does that fit in? Or does it? Because it might be, all right, that's for practice and for the games.
So I usually separate them on different days, right? So I typically have my kids 2 to 3 times a week. So if we're doing twice a week, we do 1 linear and 1 goal line day, which literally goal line is like the main drill we play. We have some other variations. I'll use other games. I don't like playing goal line 100% of the time, but that is the main, that to me is the feed the cats of agility, right? It's playing this game. You do it fresh, you do it fast, you do it explosive, and you do it constant. If I was going to do it on the same day, I'd use goal line to warm up the 10-yard fly, hands down. I would absolutely do that. I'd probably do a general warm up. I do goal line or some sort of agility drill. and then I give a little rest and go right into the 10-yard fly. I'd actually be curious what those numbers are. I don't do that often, but I'd want to see what those numbers are, because I've always felt the most warmed up I've ever been is after playing a pickup basketball game to like 10 or 11. I've never felt better after like an initial warm up basketball game, right? So
Yeah.
some sort of agility base where you're changing direction. You can kind of self-regulate how fast you're going, but the intensity is high because it's a competitive situation. I don't think that's going to help each other.
Yeah. Yeah. What about, where does vertical jump fit in this for you? Because I know you've talked on Twitter a bunch of times about that as well, and I just want to see where this fits in, and how do you feel about vertical jump, vertical training?
Yeah, vertical. I mean, it's overblown, and it's also really important. I've been obsessed with jumping high and trying to dunk like since I was probably fourth grade or fifth grade. I was always short and scrawny, and I wanted to be able to dunk. And right, like I got there a little bit in high school, college, at my size, which to me was decently impressive because I'm not super tall. But I've always just been obsessed with it. It's the fun part of basketball and volleyball where you can jump really high. It's impressive, right? There's kind of some status to it. And then in the strength world, we've taken that as the vertical force, predominant, measurement, KPI that everybody likes to track, right? So I do think there's tons of value in that. If you can get that number up, that means probably something good's happening nervous system wise and muscular skeletal system, training that ability. So what I've noticed though is the approach step is really important for a lot of jumping, right? The ability to run into a jump and that coordination. So we utilize some, general hurdle jumps with double taps or single, kind of traditional plyometrics where you're doing a single tap over and getting them really explosive. But we've also utilized a lot of approach steps, whether it's doing an approach off of a 2 foot or off of a 1 foot. We use a lot of hurdles for that, or I have some sort of target, whether it's a basketball hoop or in my weight room, we have decently low ceilings with things hanging down. So have them touch, different vents and pipes on the ceiling, make sure they don't knock them out. But we utilize a lot of like jump and touch with a little bit of approach, because essentially what's happening there is how can I transfer horizontal force or horizontal speed into vertical force, right? Which is a whole different ballgame. That's a lot of coordination. That's a lot of skill. When you've seen some of these insane jumpers, they may have pretty mediocre standing verticals, but you put them into an approach situation and they can transfer that speed so well through their ankles, through their hips, through their knees. And that essentially it's a technique and practice and repetition on that. And so building that ability is really important, especially for the sports that utilize a lot like basketball and volleyball. Even soccer, they're, doing a running header or something like that. They're rarely from a standstill jump. So I don't think it's wrong to train those qualities, but I'm going to incorporate that approach step a lot in terms of our vertical jump training. We utilize a lot of approach jumps.
Yeah, that's interesting because I just started listening to Dr. Andy Galpin and on Huberman Lab with the series, and he was talking about in the first episode assessments, and he was talking about the approach, using the approach, because again, you never really, maybe somebody the tip off at basketball or whatever, but from that perspective,
rarely the straight vertical jump used. It's pretty uncommon. Even in basketball, if you're rebounding, sometimes they'll have that, but that ability to build up. And what I've noticed with some kids who never, whether they play hockey or lacrosse, and they don't do a lot of approach jumping, when they try, it's so uncoordinated, and they're coordinated people, right? So that tells me if you don't have exposure to this, it's going to be hard to just do unless they've done a lot of dunking at recess or tried to jump with their buddies in their backyard or whatever. If they have a hoop at their house, if they haven't gotten a lot of exposure to it, even if you're athletic, that can still be hard if they don't know it. So that there's coordination and general physical capacities there that you need to train and give them exposure to. So we utilize box jumps or hurdle jumps or jump and touch something, some sort of target. So that's a really important aspect.
Yeah. I feel like with some of those, the things that people want to, they follow what the tradition, right? Like, well, this is what we're supposed to be doing, and without really thinking about that sport or what's really happening, right? We're just like, yeah, vertical jump is either counter movement or non-counter movement, and it's standing there. And I think Andy Galpin was talking about he uses two hands too to do it as well.
Oh,
right?
yeah. Yeah, there's all those where you can, mess with, the height, where that's where people get mad at. They only want to take some force plate number, which I'm like,
Yeah.
I don't think any basketball player gives a damn if you use a force plate, or they probably want to know their jump anyway with the vertex, because that's what they want to know. So, but with movement based things like agility, speed, jumping, I've noticed the less I pay attention to coaches and their theory, and the more I just watch film.
Yeah.
The best athletes leave clues in how to do it. And so whether it's speed training with, knee position or rotation, it's like, well, when I watch Usain Bolt do it, he rotates a lot through his shoulders and his hips. Are we trying to take that away, or is he the fastest human of all time because of that? Right. So that's where maybe research can uncover some things. But I think the more I've noticed, it's coaching theory and not fact, then it's just a hypothesis they have, whether they heard it kind of like practice with some of these sport coaches. If you want to tie it back around, of I heard it from him, he heard it from him, he heard it from him. And also it's like, oh, well, why are we doing it that way? Like when I look on film, it's never done that way. Right. So especially with agility, I got rid of, a lot of things that, and speed. Like I don't do wall drills anymore at all. I think they have very little application in any way. So in snap downs with jumping, I don't use snap downs. I don't see much value in them. But things like that, where I've just looked at film and tipped the cap to like Lee Taft with like something like a false step or a plyo step. That was like the original eye opener for me of, I was coached, at one point never to step backwards. And then you're like, oh, and I watch a film every single time an athlete needs to, they use a plyo step. So what are we doing trying to change that? and why are they using it? It's reflexive. So the more you watch video on athletes, the more clues you get, and then you can use that within, especially movement-based training. Weight room's a little bit different, right? You have bars on your back and things of that nature, where it's going to be a little bit trickier.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I think when you look at some of these things and the coaches and like you said, with sometimes we don't want to change it. Like you said with the Lee Taft stuff, Lee's, and I know you've done a lot of posts where you post video and then you kind of go over it, right? And say, hey, here's what happened. And the video breakdown. Yeah, that's awesome. Let's just finish up today with really training kids, because you have an interesting situation where, I mean, I was watching those videos with your GoalLine drill. Yeah. And I mean, talk about diversity in size and age. And, like, I don't know how you're coaching that, but talk to me about what's your approach with coaching kind of these different skill levels that come to a session.
Yeah. So, I mean, that was the summer. And so in my summers, I have middle school up to, like, there was a kid who's playing college basketball in that group. Right. So we have literally seniors from 7th grade or 6th grade to seniors. And so that group was a little unique for mine, but it was a lot of fun because they were very competitive. Nobody was really backing down, right? Those are the most fun groups, is when it's a massive difference in age, but they're all training hard. I've obviously had, groups that wasn't the case, and I've had a massive range, and, some kids want to train hard and some kids don't even want to be there. My class can be mandatory at times. It's a school. That brings a different dynamic. And then other times it's completely voluntary, and that changes the dynamic completely, right? So or if you get a team and, the girls are tired and they have a game tomorrow and they don't want to be in there doing whatever, right? So it always changes. I'd say for the most part, when I get a new group, I talk a lot about just wanting, if I can leave anything. I just told the group this last week because we changed trimesters, and, I mostly have 9th and 10th graders in my general classes. And I was telling them, if I could leave one thing here, is that you feel like I respect you and that I'm on your team. I'm supporting you. Right. I told them, if I ever break those two things, please, you're allowed to come and yell at me and have a conversation. Like, I want you to feel that. So when I start there, I feel like it builds trust. And then from there, we're going to go, and I'm going to I tell them from the beginning, you're going to, especially I have groups where there's non-athletes in terms of they don't play sports at all. And then I have some groups, it's all just highly competitive kids. And so it's difficult, man. I wish I had a great answer. I don't. Some groups are hard to deal with, and I don't enjoy it every day, and I don't look forward to it. And then other groups, I can't wait to get in there and go. The more we acknowledge that, I think it's okay. And some kids, I have conversations with them like, I don't think you're ready for this. I don't think this is a good timing. I always base it around, though, this isn't a good time for it at this point in their life, not forever. I never want to discourage them to not be in my class. Sometimes I just say, maybe this isn't the right setting or this dynamic of group or whatever it is. Right. So I always want to come back. They feel like I'm on their team and I'm supporting them. But I wish I had great answers. I don't. Sometimes I do well. Sometimes I'm terrible.
Yeah, and I was thinking of like the college type or the kid, he's like, man, I got to go get, this isn't competition
for me. In the world.
Yeah.
That kid was just, he's a coach's son. His dad coached at our school.
Okay.
He's just one of those like awesome kids. And his girlfriend, I think, was in the class too. Like, so he's just one of those guys you wish you had 15 of in every group to like help the younger players. He's awesome.
Yeah. Cool. Very cool. Well, Casey, I just want to remind everybody, follow Casey on Twitter. We're going to have his videos from the GoalLine drill that he posted. We're going to post them on the show notes as well. So, Casey, thanks for coming on. It's so great to have you on after all this time. And like, really, you're so passionate about agility and coaching. And, like we talked about earlier, creating and limiting separation and playmaking skills. Great stuff from you today. So I really appreciate you coming on.
Yeah, Anthony, it's been great. Thank you so much. I've, this is kind of cool for me. I've been listening for a long time, so I appreciate the invitation and hope coaches enjoyed it.
They will. All right, that's going to do it for episode 353 of the Strength Coach Podcast. Guys, the show notes are located at continuefit.com or strengthcoachpodcast.com. Don't forget, try the new strengthcoach.com out for 7 days for free. Go to strengthcoach.com and start your free 7-day trial. Special thanks to Chris Party and the folks over at Perform Better. Online sale right now, 50% off a bunch of stuff, including bumper plates, kettlebells, and dumbbells. The one-day seminars continue in Boston on March 18th and Chicago on April 22nd. Also, the summit dates for Orlando, Chicago, Long Beach, and Providence are all set. I will be in Long Beach. Excited for that. Check it all out at performbetter.com. Thanks to Coach Boyle and Casey Wheel for sharing their insights and philosophies into the world of strength and conditioning, performance enhancement, and agility. Check out the anniversary interview that I did with Coach Boyle, 40 Mistakes, 40 Years. There is a link to access that at the show notes in strengthcoachpodcast.com. Thanks to Sumi Seth and Namli helping build relationships through personalized communication so your members stay longer and pay longer. Go to namli.com. Use the referral code StrengthCoach to get started on your free 30-day trial. Thanks to Athletic Greens. Visit athleticgreens.com/StrengthCoach and get your free 1-year supply of vitamin D and 5 free travel packs today. That's going to do it for this episode. My name's Anthony Renna. Thanks again for listening, and I'll speak to you next time.